Are we recording already?
Oh yeah, no, we've been recording for like the.
Welcome back to the Paint and Paper Podcast.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
Kevin,
I'm Joey.
and I like how last week we started off on a subject that's pretty core to D&D in general, and this time we picked a subject that is just so semantical and like random. In a topic like this, really, our goal isn't to answer questions; it's to get them, y'all,
Thinking.
ask the questions that we're asking.
Yeah, just to like pose. So yeah, so theoretical, not practical.
Oh no!
Yeah, don't you just love Robot Gilly Man? Honestly, I feel like the topic we're about to talk about is like 4 different topics that are kind of just jumbled up into this just homunculus abomination.
But it's a fun one.
It's a fun one. I feel that this is a debate that nerds, like a conversation nerds have had throughout the ages.
What is that, Joe?
Talking about the differences between high, mid, and low fantasy as they are seen through the presence of a wizard. So, to sum that up more eloquently, it would be, what are the narrative implications of a wizard in a fantasy setting?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Where should we start?
I think immediately off the bat, what does it mean? Well, maybe we should define some words before we really get into it. What is high, medium, and low fantasy? What are a couple of examples? And what do we mean by narrative implications?
Mm-hmm.
So we were doing a little bit of talking, a little bit of discussing on our back and forth and what we kind of think narrative implications mean to each of us. And we had pretty similar answers. My answer was how a subject interacts and influences the narrative of the game world at a micro and macro level.
I said something similar. It's the give and take between the subject and the setting / lore. What does the subject say in the context of the lore, and what does the lore say about the subject?
Yeah, so I'd say that between those two definitions, I'd say that gives a pretty good fundamental of what we mean. And, you know, as we talk more, we'll figure out specifics of where we're going.
I think another thing we have to define, what is a wizard? Because you think of like iconic wizard, you think Gandalf, but he's probably like a sorcerer or something like that.
Oh my God.
Could be even a cleric.
Oh, we're already getting into it. Anyway, let's put that on the back. Let's put that for a sec.
So I think the main thing about a wizard is that it's about, as with all casters, their identity comes from the source of their power, and for wizard, that's study.
Well, before we even like broach that topic, let's also define low, mid, and high fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. High fantasy, just magic is readily available. It is bountiful and just ambient and constantly being used. High fantasy setting would be something like World of Warcraft, where, you know, a regular NPC would be just walking down the road and there's just like 20 walking light shows that just pass them all at once. I mean, technically not I'm talking like within the game world of World of Warcraft. The what's it called? Worlds, like the books and stuff, aren't as insane and aren't as crazy and don't really take the implications of the players existing into the thing. Because you want to know what's funny?
What?
So World of Warcraft has been around for however many years. I like how I go down a digression immediately after I stop you from going down a digression. World of Warcraft has been out for however many years. I think it's like more than 15 years. I'm pretty sure there is only one boss in the entire game that is attributed to being killed by players, lore-wise. Yeah. Technically. I mean, I'm pretty sure that changed over time. And that was like Cthulhu. I remember watching a lore video that was
I
like
don't know
talking
who
about
that is.
it's like an old god, big eyeball. I should show you some stuff about Cthulhu because Cthulhu is hilarious. It was such a screw you to players like when they first encountered it. Anyway,
See, for me, high fantasy kind of the definition that I always kind of thought was more about the quest. Like you said that magic is readily available in high fantasy, but Lord of the Rings is technically high fantasy because the stakes of the quest are epic in nature. It involves the fate of the world, do or die, good and evil. But it's like classically a low magic setting.
huh? So maybe my definition of well, then it's good that we're defining this now, because in my head, high to low fantasy isn't the scale of the combat or the scale of what you're facing. It's the how pervasive is magic within a setting. That's how I've always seen it. Like maybe I'm wrong, and I can look up some definitions.
See, I've heard it used both ways, which is the interesting thing. So just at a quick Google search, high fantasy or epic fantasy is a subgenre of fantasy defined by the epic nature of its setting or by the epic stature of its characters, themes, or plot.
Okay. So that's funny. I guess in my mind, I've used epic fantasy to describe what you just described, and I've used high fantasy to describe high magic. So in my mind, I
don't know the genre of fantasy that involves a heightened level of magic. So because we're probably going to have to talk about that, do you want to say, for the purposes of this video, high fantasy means lots of magic, epic fantasy means big quest?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I guess like vice versa, low fantasy would be low magic, and like mundane fantasy would be small scale.
Right.
Okay.
Personal quests.
Yeah. Like finding a cat that was stolen by a gremlin.
Yeah.
Kind of deal. That's a fun campaign.
All character driven quests and vendettas, I think, is what that mundane fantasy means.
Yeah. I think the DMG of 5th edition kind of breaks it down pretty well. It documents the scale of adventures. It talks about here like the different stages, like how each 5-level increment kind of changes where the scale of the players and what kind of conflicts that they're interacting with. I can't remember what it was, but it was like heroes of the town, heroes of the realm, heroes of the
country, heroes of the world kind of thing.
Yeah, of the dimension and so on, and like as you go up. So back to wizards, right?
Right.
So before we even like delve into like, is this guy a wizard? Is this guy not a wizard? I feel like
You don't even have to do that. I was just
oh, okay.
I was just throwing a baiting question.
Yeah. You're just kind of like, yeah. So I would say the most important feature of somebody to be considered a wizard would probably be it's a living being or person who holds knowledge. You know what I mean? Like it's this person is a repository for just a font of knowledge.
Yeah, so it's somebody who utilizes magic through a study of it, who you could even say is kind of like the scientist of casters. Like they probably apply the scientific method to casting, right? So that's kind of our first step, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
in the narrative implications of a wizard, because right from the bat, you are saying that your setting has an understanding of magic.
Mm-hmm.
There that people have quantified it. It is significantly less of a mystery
Mm-hmm.
within the lore and amongst the peoples of the setting.
Mm-hmm. It is by so I think there is a distinction to be made between like a wizard and a sage. A sage is just kind of like the town's wise man, like the hermit that lives on the hill that the elders go to consult because he just has the longest memory out of everybody. He's just the wise man.
Well, it's funny you say that, because in preparation for this, one of the things I did was I looked up the classic tropes of a wizard. And before it mentions knowledge, that it actually mentions that a very common trope of the wizard is wisdom. Was named first before intelligence. And I think we maybe have that expectation, and that's specifically a D&D thing.
I think it's also the media that we grew up with. You know, we grew up with Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and
Harry Potter studies magic.
Yeah, studies magic.
Wizard.
The first thing that Gandalf does is he just leaves Frodo and then just goes reads and does research for like, what was it, like 20 or 30 years?
I think it's 11 years, something like that.
Oh, yeah. I remember the reading at the beginning of that book. It was so bizarre.
But Gandalf is also like a demigod, and that's where he gets his powers from. And the only other people in the setting are the elves who live forever. And so Galadriel, I think it says she's a sorceress at some point, but if we are applying this to the narrative implications of a wizard in Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings, maybe it just takes that long to study and learn, to need everlasting life to crack the code of magic in the setting.
Maybe, I think that really has more to do with just the way that Tolkien wrote a lot of his heroes or beings, is that they are just innately magical. So, or they call on the powers of the aspect of something else.
Yeah, I like to say that elves in Lord of the Rings are more like angels or ASMR in D&D than they are like actual D&D elves.
Yeah.
From their stat block.
Yeah, it's very strange, like the certain specifications that were made. But yeah, so going back to sage versus wizard. So the difference is, and in a low magical setting, a sage or somebody who's just knowledgeable, it would be really funny. Yeah, he's a wizard because he knows how to spark rocks together to make a bonfire. That's why he's a wizard.
Science sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah. Who was that? H.G. Wells or whatever his name was?
Probably something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I can't remember. Too many beers ago. Yeah. I think the archetype of the old wise person who kind of informs everybody around him is a trope that exists because it has existed for so long in our history. There's always been, it's like, that's why humans are unique, because we can draw upon experiences outside of our own lifetimes through written or verbal story. And it's also kind of funny, like in some ways, I guess the wise old person kind of also acts as like a bard in a way, depending on the thing. But
Yeah, you could make a case for that.
yeah.
I think technically bards study and learn, but it's kind of just more intuitive for them. That's why it's charisma.
Well, I mean, even breaking away from the mold of 5th edition, I think the only real difference between a wizard or like a sage and a bard would be one it just holds the knowledge, the other one is intentionally distributing it and by putting on a performance, by thinking about ways that it could be entertaining and educational, because bards, as part of their training, like what in medieval history, had to learn like hundreds of songs and stories to recite, just by straight memory. So I think that's really cool. So that's an interesting thing. It's like there aren't actually any wizards. It's just all bards, and and the magic is the
Friends we made along the way.
yeah, basically. It's the all the information. So going back to classical wizards.
I've got the list of tropes here.
Okay.
I want to just like pop these down one at a time because I think they're kind of simplistic.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
But they're classic archetypes. So the first one is their attire, which is like literally Gandalf, the robe, the pointy hat. But I think the part that we should talk about, because it has a real effect on the character, is the staff, right? Like
the item of power.
Yeah, their magic focus.
Yeah. And sometimes I think it varies, right? Sometimes it's a staff, a ring. So I'll just call out examples that I can think of. A staff, Gandalf, a ring, King Solomon, and his whole magical lore, an amulet,
An orb to ponder.
an orb to ponder, a wand, Gandalf, the one true, the Elder Wand, a book, like a grimoire, and so what do all those kind of have in common, would you say?
Well, if I think what those, at least what they say, is that the setting requires something more than the self to cast. I think it kind of reflects, I mean, except I guess with Gandalf, but it kind of reflects on how mundane a wizard still is, but who focuses their powers through some kind of object, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because really we're talking about, in comparison to other casters, we're talking about like Iron Man versus Thor, right? Because Iron Man, he builds his arsenal. The wizard writes his spell book and everything, but Thor is the god of thunder. He's just like ready to rock and roll.
So Thor is a wizard.
I think yes. No, he's probably a paladin, but it's about the innate nature of their power being within themselves.
So he's a
versus,
sorcerer.
Yes.
Yeah. Storm sorcerer. I don't even know if those exist within 5e or whatever, but I'm sure. Yeah, what I kind of see those items being is a scroll or a book is an article that holds knowledge. A staff, ring, an amulet.
Could also be amplifiers.
Yeah, but I'm thinking like narratively, what is the point of it being a staff, a ring, an amulet, or a wand? I think that is, those are seen as items of power, but I would say that probably the most common item of power seen in our history would be like a sword. Mm-hmm. The heroes always wield a sword, and that probably originates because swords are seen as like knightly weapons. There was a reason when knights would duel, they wouldn't duel with maces, despite it being a more effective weapon. They would duel with long swords, and then the pommel would be replaced with a spiked pommel similar to a mace, so that they could use it. Um, I think it like shows that there's this notion of power, like in the rings, obviously rings, amulets, jewelry obviously show status. um a a wand or a staff is definitely something that you can menace at somebody, but um it's not as immediately threatening as like a sword would be. So I just think that's interesting. Why do you
It's
think that would be?
I think it's mostly about aesthetic in that kind of case. I think it's like, oh, this is a wizard. How can we show that? We give him a wizard staff, right? But I think in terms of like the narrative implications, it also says that um, this person applies their trade as a wizard, and they're proficient enough to either seek out this artifact, or this magic item that helps them in their craft, or skilled enough to craft it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it also probably marks a certain level of prestige
Yeah.
for a wizard that you encounter.
Yeah. I think it's definitely prestige. I think it's also a way of saying that this is a person of importance and a person of power, and they're so confident in their power that they don't need to brandish weapons of like a traditional weapon of war. I think that that's what that's saying about why that is. And then for robes, um, robes are definitely, especially, they always come with like a lot of colors and a lot of patterns and everything. When you think of your traditional wizard, like blue robe, stars and moons,
Right.
strung from silver thread.
In Dragonlance, there's I, I'm gonna get like I get his alignment wrong, but there's a wizard named Raislin who has this whole story arc of morality where his classic wizard, body frail, mind off the charts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the setting of Dragonlance, the color of your robe represents your alignment as a wizard. So I think he spends most of the story with a red robe, which means you're neutral. White robes mean you're good, and then towards the end of the trilogy, or one of the trilogies, spoilers, he ends up with a black robe, showing that he has gone evil in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like, within a setting, robes can have meaning, but I think it's deeply personal to the setting.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, it's pretty much an aesthetic thing.
I I I think that there's a little bit more to it than that. I think that once again, robes are an extravagant item within a medieval setting that require a lot of material. It's not practical to work in. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of akin to royalty. So I think in a lot of
But it
ways,
breathes, it's got good airflow.
yeah. Well, I mean, only if you like, air it out every now and again. You gotta like waft it, like fan it out. Um, but I think that it really originates from a notion of this is a item that is strange, looks weird. It and it dem, I think it denotes status. I think it's like a status symbol to.
You could say it's like regal adjacent, right?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm getting at, because like purple was a very expensive color back in the Middle Ages, and I got to imagine that blue, like bright royal blue, royal blue, there you go, was also a very expensive color. And so I really think that that's kind of why it's to show that this person has like status of they have like this expansive mind, and all those sort of things are meant to like kind of make them set them apart and make them look weird. But getting back on track to what does, and those are just like the appearance tropes. Those aren't even needed to be. I would say that those aren't even needed to like do a wizard. I just think it's important to think about those
Right.
physical characteristics that we associate with wizards to understand why they're there and to break them down.
Yeah, a trope isn't innate, it's just classic.
Yeah.
Right. Like this, the next one I have is a wizard is generally solitary, which is interesting because you said the sages, and specifically, it mentioned like the classic wizard tower. So I think like, what is like the narrative implications of a wizard tower?
That the wizard requires seclusion and protection. You don't erect a tower unless you need
I
you
think
need to protect something.
I think this displays what we mean by narrative implications very well, right? So, in a mundane fantasy setting, you might have people who are more afraid of magic, so a wizard would seclude themselves to avoid the mob, right? I think if I had to make an educated guess, I would say Wizard Tower probably started out being a comparison to like Galileo, and so there it's like an observatory is the probably the original basis, and then you have people like Dale Kingsmill, who in one of her videos she says that in her setting, wizard towers exist to give wizards a view around, and towns within view of their wizard tower can light a beacon to summon the wizard to their town in times of need.
Yeah.
So it's like utility, safety. It's the narrative implications of the setting.
Alternatively, it could also be a prison, because the dungeon from Don John was was typically a very tall tower that you put somebody. It wasn't like the dungeons like beneath. It was typically a tall tower that was isolated, that couldn't be scaled. And so maybe these wizards are something that's they are an innately dangerous entity, so they need to be secluded, and you don't want their mess spilling out into the rest of the town, kind of like a Rapunzel scenario. It's like, they're free to come and go maybe as they wish, because, they're wizards. Good luck stopping them unless I guess you paint the walls with lead or something, and they can't like actually change. They're just like kind of chained there. But I do think like thinking the idea of a mage's college is just kind of the guise for it's just a prison. It's just an open air prison to put all these magical freaks in the place they belong.
I think the presence of a mage's college has a direct inference onto, or direct glimpse at the level of fantasy you're trying to achieve, right?
Yeah, so let's get back onto that.
Like I said, I think it represents an understanding of magic and a banishing of like the mists of what am I trying to say?
It implies a certain level of illumination and understanding to the nature of magic and the nature of the world that may not exist in other settings where magic is so bizarre and unconquerable.
Right. I think there's another topic that we've been passing around on our list. That's why don't fantasy settings advance technologically? And I guess that depends on the setting, right? But I think it is that choice to gamify it. This setting has gone down the tech tree of magic instead of science, and they might go this way or that, but like I think magic probably represents the quicker way to power, right? Because you have things like warlocks and druids and such. But
yeah, the knowledge is already there. You just need to sell your soul.
Yeah, exactly. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that there's like a lot of just really easy things. Like also depending upon the nature of magic. But let's get back onto laying out. I think we've kind of discussed the tropes of what is a wizard pretty well. We would say that it's there are physical characteristics that are meant to set them apart. There are geographic sorts of things. There are secluded, and then there are kind of behaviors and kind of collective ideas surrounding them. Of this is a person who is very wise.
And yeah, eccentric's another word that was tossed around the tropes page.
Yeah, because like I don't know however many professors I've talked to, they're all their minds are boiled. Teachers and professors, they are just the weirdest people. Like when you really get to know them. So, but moving more into the notions of high, medium, and low fantasy and what a wizard looks like and means in those settings. So a wizard in low fantasy, low magic, I feel would just kind of be somebody who's wise, somebody who can teach people how to start fire, somebody who looks up at the sky and, they can predict the weather, not because they can...
because their bones
ache.
ache.
Their bones ache whenever the storm rolls in. And like that kind of gives them some kind of magical presence. Like people look at them and you're magical. Mm-hmm. They have knowledge of what mushrooms you can eat, of what animals are poisonous, and all of that kind of stuff is very valuable knowledge for a small community to really know. They know what herbs need to be gotten when somebody has a broken leg.
Yeah, so what you're basically saying in long form is in a low magic setting, a wizard is a scientist whose knowledge is sufficiently advanced, and therefore indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah, kind of. I would say that like a wizard in a low magic setting is kind of like a farmer's almanac. Like actually, it is the guy who holds the knowledge that everybody needs and needs to be taught, So in a way, yeah, it is through the trial and error of those things. And, a wizard's apprentice I feel like if you were going to be playing a wizard in those kinds of settings, the way that you would do it is you'd be a wizard's apprentice maybe the wizard, the wise man or whoever has like a bunch of apprentices, and he just sends them out like every single year to just like become educated on the world, like learn new languages, understand how cultural and civilization is progressing, and look at like go explore. It's like, yeah, in order to graduate from my wizard college, you literally need to document like 20 new plants and animals that haven't been created yet, or you haven't been discovered yet.
Is Professor Oak a wizard?
Technically, I guess.
By your definition that you just said?
In a low magic setting, I would say technically yes.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, because I mean he does, like he gives you technology, like he gives you the Pokedex, and he's like, go out, explore.
You're my wizard apprentice.
And bring this knowledge back to the community so that we can better protect and help ourselves. Mm-hmm. So I feel like from that perspective, that's a very, wizards, depending upon like the level of magic, are seen as like evil or not. And I feel from that perspective, the wizard would be really seen as a positive force. Like the wizard archetype or the sage would be a very positive force and like really revered in the community if their knowledge was helpful.
So my takeaway of what you've just defined is that there is no setting in which there are no wizards.
Yes.
Okay. So that's an interesting implication.
There's no setting where the wizard archetype of the wise old man Doesn't always have to be a man. Could be a wise old woman.
Wise old person.
Wise old person. Thank you. Could be like that. That trope always has to exist. There has to be somebody whose teeth haven't fallen out yet that lives a little bit longer than the rest of them.
Yeah, but so then maybe this is because I'm starting to trip over my own words. Is this conversation within the context of Dungeons and Dragons as we understand it, or is this within our understanding of wizards as the trope itself?
I guess I'm thinking broader than just Dungeons and Dragons. We can get into Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm looking because I feel what wizards are in Dungeons and Dragons is much more specific than, especially within Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, is way more specific and way more what's it called? Typecasted,
Right.
Typecasted than
I think that
wizards.
I think the trade-off is you get the hard definition of what each caster is. You know, a bard is a charismatic performer. A cleric is imbued by the gods. A druid is one with nature. A sorcerer is within themselves, and a wizard studies, right? But
Yeah.
But the trade-off is that by having a game and defining the mechanics, you know, you've already taken that step to quantify magic within the mechanics of the game. So your players, by reading the rules, are going to have an understanding of magic. So that mystique that might disqualify a letter of the law wizard from certain settings might be like a moot point if you're creating a game with mechanics, which is a game.
Yeah, and you know, as you were just talking right there, by the definition that I just laid out, every single one of those classes is a wizard.
Yeah.
The only ones that aren't wizards are martial classes, technically. By the definition that I just laid out, yeah.
No wise old barbarians.
Well, yeah. I mean, I do love the trope of the warrior poet.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe.
Got a multi-class for that.
Yeah, but I would say that moving more into what I would define a wizard in a kind of medium fantasy setting, I would think that Gandalf is a medium fantasy wizard, like medium magic level.
Well, he is definitely a wizard by our low fantasy definition.
Yeah. So
In terms of like the magic level, yeah, because in spite of being like technically a demigod, he like never casts higher than a 4th level spell.
yeah,
I think
5th edition terms. Yeah,
what level is anti-life shell? I think that's the
5th. I think.
5th. Yeah. That's his highest level.
Yeah. I didn't even know that spell existed. I remember coming across it. I was like, what the hell is this?
It's a weird one.
Yeah. But I feel stepping from low fantasy, low magic into medium magic. Magic exists.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that is the biggest difference between, you know, in low fantasy, magic, maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't, maybe it's even less kind of tangible than that. Maybe it's literally just the will of the world, or, you know, the fate is kind of seen as magic in a way, and whether or not that even exists is that. So it's like but I feel like the transition from low into medium, it's like
there is magic and these guys got it.
Yeah, magic is a thing that exists. I feel like it can range. It definitely 100% exists. I feel like it can range from, someone feeding a horse berries, and they just don't have exhaustion to the point where it's like beyond normal. Or it could be, someone shouting on top of a cliff, and an avalanche happens. And it's like, maybe even those even dip into the low fantasy area, but it's,
I would say that would be low fantasy.
yeah, I mean, those
And-
definitely would be, but what are you saying?
I don't know, I think the big difference in my mind, Gandalf, like you said, might be our archetypal example of a mid fantasy, in terms of magic scaling wizard, because he has magic. He's one of the best with magic, but he still needs a sword. He still carries a sword with him, because magic is not going to solve all of his problems.
Yeah, true. There's still mundane issues. He's not like, he's still technically mortal. Technically. Oh, did I burp into the mic?
No, you just called Gandalf mortal.
Oh, I thought I was being slick. Yeah, no, he's definitely mortal. I feel, he can definitely die. He definitely has fear of his own mortality.
Well, he gets put on the bench for 12 lifetimes that span seconds, and then respawns as a white wizard. He's got all that Balrog experience.
Yeah, that would be a funny mechanic. It's like the only way you can level up is by dying. That would be
I think
funny.
that's called Dark Souls.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. But the implications that a wizard would bring to the table would be, magic exists. It is a power, it's a force that exists, and there are people in this world who can harness it. And then that brings into the questions of who can harness it, and so on. So low fantasy, anybody can technically be a wizard. They just need to have knowledge. Mid fantasy, you start into like, okay, what is the wizards per capita that we got going on here? Because in Lord of the Rings, it's really just like 1 per billion. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe there aren't even a billion people on Middle Earth, but we know all of them.
Right, all the casters.
Yeah, we know all of the casters. And they are outsiders. Outsiders from the term of like beings from beyond
Right.
material reality. So I think how rare are magic users?
Who can use it, and the potency and magnitude of magic itself, I think, is another big key part of it.
What is the source?
A wizard's implication on the setting, or vice versa, is directly representative of how much magic can be understood within a setting. Because the sage in our low fantasy example is pretty much just like a smart, wise scientist, and if there is magic, it's just their intuition and their wisdom that guides them through it. Whereas in a high fantasy setting, it is something that a character has studied for thousands of years or something like that, and gained this knowledge scientifically.
Yeah.
I think that the levels of magic in a setting are definitely important, but if we're talking about narrative implications, to me, that ties very heavily to the setting itself. So like maybe we should start like naming off some set. We've been hitting Lord of the Rings real hard in through our examples. What's another setting that has wizards in it?
Conan. I've been reading a ton of Conan the Barbarian, of the old stuff.
See, that's an interesting one. I'm a Conan fan myself. That's one where magic is kind of innately evil, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the archetype of like the evil wizard, the dark sorcerer in the high castle, and Conan just has his muscles and his sword.
Yeah, his brawn. It's very kind of like fire and ice. The just like your classic sword and sorcery. It's the weapon of cowards and villains.
Right. So the presence of a wizard implies a departure from the norm and a departure from what's moral, right?
I think, but even like more basic than that, I think what it represents is a power imbalance. It's there are the kings and kingdoms and the people of the realm and the power that they naturally possess, and then there are the wizards who kind of muck about with the status quo. It's their existence upsets they are a destabilizing force within the world. And I think that's very important to kind of think about. Can't remember which story it was, but it was one of the late era Conan stories where Conan was he was chief of this band. There was this circle of wizards called the Circle of Seers or something like that were trying to basically just muddle with political drama. He got roped into it because he was trying to save this girl, Yasmela, and he goes on this quest to fight all these wizards. Just the scale that they were dealing with was on the scale of countries and nations. And it was interesting because it was one of the first Conan stories. I basically was reading them in chronological order of publication. So it was one of the first Conan stories that was really addressing kind of politics beyond like, this is the local governor and he's a coward. But for that, there was like multiple kingdoms. There was like 4 or 5 different political factions that were kind of competing for their own sort of desires, and their desires were super simple. It was just like money or whatever, money, political power, whatever. And the wizards were by far the lowest number. Like that was out of everybody, they had the least numbers and the least wealth, but they were by far the most feared and the most powerful. And that's kind of also echoed in the Black Company as well.
Right.
Where it's like these wizards, if you're a powerful enough wizard, you're essentially a doomsday weapon, or like a weapon of mass destruction that you can just roll through a battlefield. Like, what was it? Stormcaller? That one was just like peppering the oncoming armies with boiling acid.
I think in both Black Company and Conan, and maybe you can having read both these two, you can tell me if you got this impression, but I kind of especially in Conan got the sense that in fact I think you might have already said something in this conversation about this, but wizardry is kind of the cowardly way, because these guys want to wield this terrifying power as a bully, but you could also kind of make the statement that they want to covet this power to themselves, and they're probably the most afraid in that they fear death more than anybody else, because they went to these incredible lengths
Yeah.
to achieve this power that might save them.
And what's really funny is when you look at D&D and the lore of D&D, every single wizard, once they get to a certain power threshold, starts searching for immortality. Every single one in deep D&D lore.
It's like it's like an assumed like fact in The Witcher that like it's actually a moderately simple spell that sorcerers can cast to just like boop, I'm kind of younger again. Like Yennefer is like 90 something in by the time of the Witcher 3 game. Geralt, for his own reasons, is like, I want to say like 113. Those numbers are definitely wrong, but you get the idea. Like,
Yeah, they're somewhere in the realm of a century through either mutation or whatever it's called, magical preserve in their life.
And they use those powers to in a narratively cowardly light to kind of like compare themselves to the protagonist like Conan, who is the height of bravery and heroism and just like a pillar of these virtues of like
a very interesting thing in Conan and also in the Black Company. All of the seers of the Black Circle in Conan, and the I can't remember what the Taken and the Queen from the Black Company. All of them were at one point human, but also refer to other humans. They make a distinction of saying that they are not human and that they are something beyond human. And so magic in those settings it's selfish, it's self-serving, it's cowardly. There's the innate fear of death, and there is a it kind of theme of superhumanism. I can't remember what that's called.
Is it transhumanism?
Transhumanism, yeah. Like you take on an aspect that you are like more than human. You're better than human.
I know that because of 40K.
Yeah. There you go.
Transhuman physiology, baby.
Yeah, transhumanism. So taking on those aspects is just very interesting. That's kind of what that's seen as. That the acclamation of power for its own sake is innately evil.
And so closely associated with greed. And I think when they in a lot of these tropes, one of the tropes I didn't mention earlier is the idea of like an acolyte. And I think you can kind of in the same form of like the wizard. I think we're talking about the wizard villain at this point. You can kind of look at the Sith in Star Wars, where because these evil wizards have so much greed, they're very hesitant to take an apprentice. But in Star Wars, the Sith still have this fear of death, like Darth Plagueis. That was his whole thing. He just didn't want to die and developed this eternal life before Palpatine killed him. But they never intend for their apprentice to surpass them. That's directly opposed to their self-interest, and yet they still take an apprentice to meet their own needs and such. Like Darth Maul was pretty much just supposed to be a Clone War death machine. They didn't want to teach him anything, any of the deeper powers of magic in Star Wars, right?
Yeah. Jedi are wizards. Don't get it misconceived. Don't mix it around. They are wizards. Um,
I mean, Star Wars is a fantasy series after all.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not a sci-fi series. No, it's a fantasy
It's got
series.
princesses and wizards and dark lords.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, dudes in shining armor, like running around. Um,
So when you're preparing, when you do setting design, have you ever made any considerations for wizards and your own narrative implications?
yeah. I think I do break it into those two kind of archetypes that we've talked about, the good wizard and the evil wizard. Evil wizard would kind of be in fifth edition your Hallister. The good wizard would kind of be Lady Silverhand. Just to give very like clear examples. So in some ways, I kind of have my wizards, my evil dark wizards, kind of operate like a warlock patron. Going into high fantasy, and I think Hallister, Black Cloak, and Lady Silverhand are great examples.
Or I'm gonna need you to explain that then. If we're going in on those, I don't know who they are.
Oh, okay. So Hallister Black Cloak is the arch villain of Dungeon of the Mad Mage.
Oh, okay.
He is the premier wizard that exists there. He, for whatever reason, was just obsessed with the Underdark. I'm sure there's like some deep lore that you can find. You know, he's a holdover from, I think, third, maybe even second. I don't really know when he first came onto the scene. And Lady Silverhand is the open lord of Waterdeep as it exists in the fifth edition setting. So Lady Silverhand is a chosen of Mystra. It's like she, and then there's like three other dudes. One that was one of the D&D writers' self-insert characters. The husband of Lady Silverhand, which I can't remember what his deal was, if he's dead or not. And then Lady Silverhand. So she has been bestowed magical power beyond the comprehension of and ability of normal people at the behest of the goddess of magic, Mystra. So, which I think
Is it kind of a curse of knowledge?
No.
Situation. Oh, okay.
So Mystra is a neutral god. So she will so the only thing that she asks is that you generate new knowledge. So there's also a Dracolich, which is the one and only, like one of the only like I can't remember if it's like CR 30 or CR 50. That's also a chosen of Mystra. So Lady Silverhand survived the spell plague. She survived a whole bunch of crazy stuff, and she's now the open lord of Waterdeep. I think she's a very interesting character because she's kind of seen as like a benevolent figure who is a stabilizing force in the Sword's Coast. She brings a lot of law and order. I don't really know much about her individual personality because I haven't read the books that describe like what her deal is. But she is somebody she's a stabilizing force. Hallister Blackcloak is in the deepest, darkest, dankest layers.
I mean, he's a mad mage.
Yeah, of the Undermountain, the dungeon that exists, the mega dungeon that's under Waterdeep. And so he descended into Waterdeep with like a whole bunch of different apprentices, and as you kind of delve, you find his apprentices and you figure out like whatever ill-begotten fate they came to, like how they were hurt, how there's like one who's like an electric flaming skull who like animates flesh golems. That was a really fun encounter. I changed that encounter around to like spice things up, but
Yeah, like it's it's like Darth Maul, not an apprentice to teach, an apprentice to use, right? They became experiments, sounds like.
well, that's the weird thing, because the book explicitly says that apprentice asked Hallister to turn her into a flaming skull of electricity.
She's got her own thing going on there.
Yeah, she was super
okay.
weird. She was trying to. I don't really remember what she was trying to do. She was like trying to like just make an army of flesh golems and stuff. So like that was just a lot of stuff that was going on there. But I think that kind of dichotomy of stabilizing force that kind of acts as that old wise man being Lady Silverhand, and your kind of deranged cave dwelling hermit who is just seeking power for his own sake would be Hallister. Other examples in fantasy would be in Conan. That's every single wizard in Conan. I would say like if you there's also what's also interesting in Conan is magic is innately demonic.
Right.
Yeah.
You're talking about examples of like the evil wizard archetype?
In kind of I'm just commenting. I think that it's interesting because when you're cooking up your magical setting, you kind of also need to think about the source of where the magic comes from. Mm-hmm. And the source of where it comes from in D&D is the weave, which is just this fabric that pervades all of existence, and basically by manipulating these invisible threads of reality, you manifest different effects, right? But in Conan, it's always calling upon one of two things. It's either summoning something beyond the veil, or it is projection of your ego, essentially. So it comes from your mind or it comes from beyond. Mm-hmm. And it's like in Conan, it's always innately evil, and it is almost always innately demonic.
It like specifically comes from demons, right? It's all like unholy magic and.
Depends on.
Just, I think it's all told from Conan's perspective, and he's not exactly the brightest bulb, right?
It's third person omnipotent.
Oh, that's right.
So it's like these things are described as like unholy, mm-hmm. and like devilish. That is like an innate, like a fundamental characteristic.
I think that's one of the things I found in the Witcher books, is that it's all told from a perspective, and that in spite of Geralt's deep knowledge of magic, mm-hmm. He knows these things specifically to kill them. Mm-hmm. That's his use for the knowledge, and through that use of perspective, that's how they maintain that mystique, that those kinds of settings apply, or like to use narratively around magic to keep it more mysterious and like a force of nature. I think they call it chaos in Witcher, to that end too. Mm-hmm. I've also heard Odin mm-hmm. described as like the wizard archetype, kind of. Mm-hmm. He's kind of an example of, if we're talking about the good sage and the evil wizard, he's kind of in the middle, because he covets knowledge to keep to himself, and this is certain interpretations,
Are
And
you talking about the historic like mythology, or are you talking about how he's kind of viewed in like God of War?
uh, interpretations of mythology,
Okay.
because Norse mythology is very vague and can be translated uniquely sometimes.
So
I've heard him like ascribed to depression in some cases, where like that curse of knowledge comes through, where he he covets knowledge, but because he has so much already, he already has the curse, so he just needs to dive deeper and continue down the path to, maybe eventually acquire the knowledge he needs to free himself of the curse.
yeah. Um Yeah, there's a lot of interesting symbolism that goes on with Odin, especially sacrificing his eye for knowledge and
Exactly,
then
yeah.
also hanging himself for 9 days or
Days.
something from Yggdrasil.
In that case, it's an implication that magic is something to be suffered for.
There's a cost.
Yeah.
There's a cost associated with knowledge. And that is also present in H.P. Lovecraft,
Right.
that too much knowledge causes you to go insane, which, speaks this kind of conversation of there's a cost to magic, there's a cost to that kind of information, whether it's like a physical toll or a mental toll. Kind of also feeds into like the notion of eccentricity, which was one of our defining characteristics of a wizard. Interesting thing to think about. Is magic is magic innately good, evil, or neutral? Is it something that is innately chaotic? Is it a a force for order of chaos? Is it something that is given freely, like in D&D? I would really have to say magic is really given freely,
Absolutely.
like really entirely without any cost. But then other sorts of settings, magic oftentimes requires the ultimate cost of not just sacrificing your body or your time and your energy to research it, but literally the lives of innocents. There's always like the trope of like sacrificing,
magic.
blood magic, sacrificing a virgin on an altar to whatever sort of dark god to
Achieve
beseech
whatever goal.
beseech power. So
Yeah, this is a subject that doesn't really, like, we were never going to reach an answer in this
Yeah.
in this conversation. It's kind of something where we can define a wizard, and then we can define aspects of a setting, and then we can digress upon their influence on each other.
there definitely is an art to tempering game mechanics to fit the genre and having the narrative implications inform your genre. And I think something like Trudvang does that very well, where it defines the different Vintners, and it really tries to lay out the kind of weirdness and majesty of the setting. What would you say about Trudvang? Because I feel like in a lot of ways it differs from a lot of the other settings I've played in.
I think it tries to use mechanics more deliberately to maintain the mystique of magic. I think their heavy use of like the miscast table is like the key part of that, where if like, yeah, we have to define how magic works for the setting because this is a game that you need to understand to play, but we need to instill a fear in you, and that's what this miscast table represents.
Yeah, it definitely is meant to represent the unknown and the unpredictable, the chaos, the natural chaotic nature of magic.
What you can know versus what you can control.
Yeah.
Because really, we could go on forever with this topic and be like, well, what about this setting? What about this setting?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Is this person a wizard?
Yeah. Well, not only that, it's super defined by the setting and what rules of magic are set out in that setting. But it then, if it's not defined within that setting, and honestly, I would say within something like Harry Potter, it's not defined what wizards can and can't do. They give you the 3 rules of magic or whatever, but that's not really a big, whatever. And in 5th edition, I would say they do very strictly define what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
But
That's a side effect of like game mechanics, or defining a game mechanic for
yeah,
a game,
but I feel like they don't really tell you why that's the case. It's like they don't really tell you why Milf's acid arrow only shoots 1 arrow when Eldritch Blast shoots 3. They don't really explain that. They also don't explain why some classes and get certain spells and why others don't, especially when it doesn't really make sense. And they go to great length to define certain magical schools, but not really what those magical schools mean or why they exist, right? I think it's like create bond. I mean, I'm probably wrong, but the example will still hold. It's like Firebolt is evocation, but create bonfire is conjuration or something like that. It's like, that might not be exactly how the rules are written, but there's plenty of spells that fall into those gray areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we had to define narrative implication, because like we can run away with this topic in so many directions, and one of them is game design. Like, you have to put these things on a slider of like mechanics versus narrative. Like this might not make sense narratively, but it's very important that we do this way so that the game is balanced, right? So what's your takeaway? What's the if you were going to design a setting right now, go like finish the podcast, go design a setting. What's the first rule that you would have to think about as wizards exist in the setting that you're creating?
What do they look like? What do they do? How do they exist within the setting? What is their role within society? Where do they get their source of power? How potent is that power? How rare are wizards? Are they a common thing? And how are they treated?
Right. I think that's why we could talk about this. We could really talk about this for hours, because we could go setting by setting, answering all of those questions.
Yeah.
For wizards in each and every one of them. I hope this ramble has helped our viewers.
Thank you very much for watching this episode.
I hope you join us next time for whatever topic that we have yet to decide.
Yeah, whatever we stumble upon the day of. Have a good night.
Night, y'all.